So in this tutorial, I'm going to cover integrating Python with the Google Maps API to find driving time and distance between two cities or towns or villages, whatever that may be, that are present in Google Maps that the user inputs. So there's a few important concepts we'll discuss here. Obviously, interacting with APIs is hugely fundamental to working with Python or more advanced data or software use cases potentially. We will also look at classic, so user inputs, which is very important in storing these in variables, and then taking some of that API data that's commonly not the most clean or readable and transferring it into a string that is very readable in plain English in this case. So we'll go through 3 stages. I'll just demonstrate this. Then I'll go through the sort of Google side, setting up credentials or an API key more specifically, and how you would potentially want to store that. And then we'll go into actually building out this script from scratch. So if I was just to demonstrate this here, what would happen if I run this script here? I'm in VS Code, but you can use whichever editor you like. Sometimes for something like this that's quite sequential and taken in chunks, something like Jupyter Notebooks may be good as well. So where will you begin your drive? We'll just specify here London within the UK. Where will you end your drive? I'll say York, another, I believe, a city in the UK. And it outputs your drive will cover a total distance of 339 kilometers, taking a total time of 4 hours and 1 minute. So quite basic in the output, but obviously this could very easily be extended by conditional communication, so emails, text messages, something on the web. This could take in conditional statements, sort of if-else logic. It could be built into GUIs or front-end applications. So there's lots of possibility here, and a lot of the common technology that you use, sort of applications, maybe like Snapchat and things, use Google Maps and will communicate with Google Maps via sort of enterprise API structures. So it's a hugely important skill to learn here. So that's the demonstration. Next, we'll actually look into how we can set this up within the Google Maps platform. Now, the second section covers actually getting started, and we need to do that because we need to have we need to establish an API key in order to interact with Google Maps, so an external product through our Python IDE, because that API will essentially act as the conduit so that we can interact with another product, which would be Google Maps, through a completely third-party tool like our Python IDE. So that's why we need it, and we need to set up an account in order to get that API key. Now, I've already done this, and actually, the documentation from Google here is pretty good and it's pretty understandable. So I'll point you to where you need to go. So initially, if you navigate to developers.google.com, maps, get started, create project, or you could just type in sort of Google Maps platform API in Google and it would likely take you to this spot. And it goes through the basic steps required. So there's a few steps. Like we say, if you never used Google Cloud Console to create a project, usually we go through projects for different services. Maybe you're interacting with BigQuery, maybe you're data lakes, or maybe you're interacting with Google Maps. You would traditionally set up a project to do that, so you can click the Get Started button. Or we can just go through these steps. So you can project selector. If you've worked through Google before, you may not have to go through all these steps, but I would just systematically work through here. And when you get to step 2, you can then go ahead and actually start getting your API. And step 3, actually get an API key with a credentials page. You'll be able to download this. And what I would do is typically put this into a different text file, a .txt file, and import it into the Python script. That's the methodology I'll be showcasing here, because you could just put in the API key as a string, between singular double quotations and read it that way. But it's not very secure if you end up collaborating, and you really need to keep these keys secure. And there's different ways actually within Google Maps platform that you can restrict these to certain actions or requests. So follow through these instructions if you've not got an API key for Google Maps platform, and then I'll see you on the other side when we actually start building out the script. Now we're going to go through the actual script for this. So like I said before, we're interacting with Google Maps. We now have our API, and we're going to find the driving time and distance between cities. And we're going to dynamically input start and end destination. And we need to, if you haven't already done this, within your command prompt or your terminal, so CMD in the start bar in Windows, you need to just type pip install Google Maps to get that library within your Python. Now, another thing to note, I've saved my API within just a separate text file, but it's in the same working directory as my main Python file here, my main script. I've just called it main py because if we got other dependencies, it's good practice. So I've just saved it here. I'm not going to open it because then you'd see my API key. But yeah, Google Maps here. So in your folder structure, if you're not using sort of ES Code, just in your standard file explorer within Windows, your folder structure, you can just save it in the same file as your main script, and we can just import this easily like I'm going to. But the first thing that we're actually going to do here is import Google Maps. We've already installed it via pip. So we will import that into our main Python script here. Now, the next thing that we want to do is, as I've already showcased, we want to get our API key actually involved here. So what we can do, I'll just format that. We can go ahead, I'll just add a comment. So we'll just say read API key from external file without disclosing in Python script. So we can do it that way. What we could also do is there's nothing to stop you just including it, and I'll show you after. Potentially, if you're working on your own and this isn't going to be shared, you could just include it within this file here. But it's good practice and nice to get used to sort of importing it in from another file. But what I'll do, I'll first of all, I'll declare a variable API, and that's just going to have the open action against it to actually go ahead and open this file. So it will be Google, and we're just essentially copying the naming here. You could just paste it. But Google Maps platform API key there, and it's a text file. I saved it in, so .txt. You might not have saved it in a text file, but I did. Again, nice and easy to do that. And then a comma, and I'm just going to add an R here to denote that it's a raw string. That's how we're going to read it. So we've got our API, which is equal to opening this file, Google Maps platform API key.txt, and then that isn't going to do anything unless we actually apply the read function here. So I'll just call this next variable API key, and I'll set that to API dot read, and that should be enough for this section. Now we're just going to pass through the API key. And I'm going through this sort of whistle stop tour, but you can feel free to stop this, look into certain elements, swap it out with the way you like to do things. But yeah, and then pass through API key or the client ID. And what I will do here is I'll just name this variable maps, and I'm going to have it equal to Google Maps dot client, and then I will say where the key is equal to our API key here that we've read from our text file. So API key. Now, like I said, you wouldn't necessarily have to do it this way if you're working on your own. You could actually just specify the API key itself that you downloaded from the Google Maps console sort of platform there. And within single or double quotation marks, you could actually just import in the key and it would read it that way. But we're going to do it a bit more securely, better practice, and we'll set that equal to API key, which is essentially just reading the value from the text file we stored it in, which is, of course, our API key. So that's making sense in a sequential manner. And here we're just going to take user inputs for start and end drive destination, because the default as we're setting this up will be that it will take the duration and distance and it will tailor that towards driving rather than sort of public transport. So this could be a really useful script if you're regularly driving for work. So we'll say start destination. I'll set that variable equal to, and it needs to be an input. So we'll wrap it within the input function. And then I'll just write text to prompt the end user to know exactly what they should be inputting. Say, where will you begin your drive? And I will actually, by using this escape character, the slash here, and n, that will actually let us introduce a new line for them to enter their input on. Again, it's just a bit cleaner. It makes a bit more readability and makes it easier for the stakeholder, end user, whatever. So, and then I'll call this next variable end destination. So I've got start destination, end destination, and I will just copy and paste this line and modify it slightly. So input, where will you end your drive? And this is going to form the basis of our, essentially our whole program, where we're looking at the start and end destination and the difference there through Google Maps. Start destination input, where will you begin your drive? New line. End destination is the input, where will you end your drive? New line for them to enter. So that's looking good so far, and we're not actually far off finishing this up here. So I'll say calculate distance through API as this next comment, distance through API, and we will just name this variable distance. We'll set that equal to. We will use so from Google Maps client here with the API, we'll use maps dot, and we're going to use the directions, sort of inbuilt functionality from the Google API. We'll say start destination. There are other things that you could specify here. I think you can specify sort of the mode of transport. You could specify latitude and longitude. You could specify, um, the time you're leaving with the date time module. There's lots of things you could do here, but we're not going to dive into that. It's sort of out with this tutorial, which shows the sort of core functionality and the core backend functions here. So we want to get the directions from the start destination that the user inputs and the end destination, and this is all sort of going through the funnel of Google Maps. It's quite interesting. So that should be fine for now. Everything seems to be correlating there. And then what I will do as well, we're going to, so basically, well, what I could do, if we said here, print distance, we could do it this way, and let's see what we get. So if I run the file, go into my terminal, where will you begin your drive? So I'll say somewhere like London. Where will you end your drive? York. And it gives you this really skewed output. There's a lot of information here, and we just want to extract the relevant information. You can see there is some here. We've got lots of distances, but there's actually a method we can use to just, I will delete that terminal to extract the relevant information. So I'll just say format API output into relevant variables, let's say. And I will tidy that up. There we go. So we'll have two here we want to measure, and one will be, I'm just going to name as the variable uh, kilometer distance there, and I will just set that equal to, and we're sort of going in here into sort of lists and dictionaries here, but I'm just going to show you what I'm using to personally retrieve these items. So go in at 0 legs, and I'm essentially just getting into this long skewed format, and I'm using sort of indexing to get the important elements here. Again, if you do want to dive into this more, you can feel free to look into the documentation. Distance, text, and I will just replicate this and modify it again. So Control V there, but I'll call this next one hours, minutes, duration, hours, mins, duration, and then we want to specify the distance again, 0, we've got legs, 0, and instead of distance in this next item, we'll get the text output nicely formatted for the duration there. So again, we could just sort of print at this point. So we could actually say, we want to, for example, maybe I want to print just the kilometer distance in this case. I can go ahead and run my script again. I'll say I want to begin my drive in York this time and end in Manchester, let's say, here, and it gives me the kilometers nicely formatted. But it would be a lot better to get this within an actual nicely formatted string for the end user, just in plain English. So I'll say pass results into an easy to read text string. And we'll finish off this script here and we'll say print. I'll say your drive will cover a total distance of, leave a space here at the end of my string because I'll then add on the value from km distance, rid of that blurb there, and then I will also add in comma and the space, and I'll say taking a total time of, and leave a space, get rid of that. Now I will add in the value from the hours, minutes, duration, then I will just add a full stop at the end. So what we've got here is we're essentially saying we just paste in the hard-coded text, your drive will cover a distance of, and then we've got kilometer distance, so here, which is just the distance that we've calculated. We saw it was about 130 kilometers. It'll be different depending on the locations that we've selected, and then it'll just format telling us the total time that it will take as well. So let's actually go ahead and try and run this now and see what happens. So we've got a new terminal. I'll say again, we'll begin our drive in York, we'll end it in London, and we get this nice text string. Your drive will cover a total distance of 340 kilometers, taking a total time of 4 hours and 5 minutes. Now that's great. Like I say, there's a lot that we could do from here. We could implement this into a GUI. We could then, send an email to someone based on this, I'm coming to visit, whatever that may be. We could sort of apply conditional logic to break this up into a certain amount of time, build it into web applications. Like I say, a lot of applications use the Python and the Google Maps API. So it's something that's really great to get your head around. Not too much effort for this basic functionality. These things, usually the case is that you need to get the credentials right at the start and the rest flows pretty easy. You can see it's very sequential. We import our library. We then read our API from another file. We then take that API and pass it into the Google Maps client. So essential for interacting with the API. That's not really Python language as such, as it's part of the Google API. Inputting values, beginner drive, ender drive, a nice dynamic touch when we're communicating with sort of really good data within the Google Maps API. We're then getting the distance calculation, outputting it in a friendly format, and then giving that in an even friendlier format, giving people a text string that they can read. So hopefully you've enjoyed this. Play around with it. Look into documentation. There's so many other things, even with this Google Maps API, you can even view things like earthquakes in real time. You can get heat maps. You could then extend this potentially with an actual map visualization displaying this also, and providing directions. So there's a lot of really good use cases. Have fun, and I hope this has shown another great way that Python can really assist and improve your day-to-day living with. So if you did like it, feel free to like, subscribe, comment, and share, and I'll see you in the next tutorial.